Greetings from Florida, the 27th state to join the Union, which it did on March 3, 1845. Its population is 18 million, making it America's fourth largest state.
It's my longest-lasting love affair.
On an average day, Florida picks up nearly 1,000 new residents. Over the last 30 years, it's grown at the rate of 3 million people per decade. When it comes to lifestyle and location, all those newcomers have a lot to choose from. Along the Atlantic coast in the south, you'll find cosmopolitan cities like Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, and Miami. The northern panhandle has a more distinctive southern flavor, more akin to its neighbors Alabama and Georgia. Then there's the Emerald Coast, stretching along the Gulf of Mexico from the Alabama line to Panama City, part of what's affectionately known as the Redneck Riviera. The northeast coast, however, is where the first Europeans came ashore.
The first settlement, St. Augustine, was established there in 1565, and it was the first permanent settlement in the United States. It is 42 years older than Jamestown, and it is 55 years older than Plymouth.
The Spanish brought the first orange trees to St. Augustine in the mid-16th century. The fruit flourished in the sandy soil and subtropical climate, and today nothing says Florida quite like the orange. In 2006, the state's citrus growers produced 63% of the entire U.S. crop. By some accounts, the Spanish originally came to Florida in search of the Fountain of Youth. Judging from the millions of senior citizens who have retired here, there might just be some truth to the legend. Cities like St. Petersburg and Sarasota have thrived as retirement communities. In fact, Florida has the oldest average population of any state. 17% of its residents are over 65. 1959 saw the start of another great influx of newcomers, Cuban refugees who fled their country after Fidel Castro and his forces overthrew the Batista government. These exiles from a small island just 90 miles away have had a huge influence on Florida's culture, particularly in Miami.
Once the Cubans arrived, they all started settling right around southwest Miami. The heart was A Street, and it was a main thoroughfare. It just grew, and then the restaurants started opening up. People drinking coffee outside. The markets were a big deal. After, 15 years, it looked like Cuba.
In 2006, half of the 1.25 million Cubans who lived in Florida made their home in Miami-Dade County.
It's a culture that's added a lot of zest to an otherwise pretty deep South community. I don't think we've ever seen in American history an immigrant group that has come over here and succeeded so quickly financially and politically as we have with the Cuban refugees over the last 45 years.
With its moderate climate and more than 1,100 miles of coastline, it should come as no surprise that Florida is one of the world's top travel destinations. In 2005, a record 84.6 million visitors poured more than $62 billion into the local economy.
Came here, for the sun.
Deep sea fishing.
Do you see what's walking by here?
The Florida sun shines more than 350 days a year, so it's only natural that a local boy would invent suntan lotion. During World War II, airman and future pharmacist Benjamin Green helped develop a protective lotion for sunburned GIs in the South Pacific. In 1944, Green used his invention as the basis for Coppertone suntan cream, the first consumer product of its kind on the market. Sunny beaches used to be Florida's biggest attraction. Not anymore. Welcome to the Walt Disney World Resort. Opened in 1971 just outside Orlando, this is the largest theme park resort in the world. It covers 47 square miles, twice the size of Manhattan, and employs up to 60,000 people, making it the largest single-site employer in the U.S. For much of its geological history, Florida was actually underwater. And today, much of it is barely above sea level. Almost all of the southeastern peninsula and the entire southern end are covered by the Everglades, the world's largest sawgrass swamp. With an area of approximately 4,000 square miles, more than twice the size of the state of Delaware, no point in the Everglades is more than 10 feet above sea level. It's the only place in the world where both alligators and crocodiles live side by side. Alligators are also found in freshwater marshes throughout the state, and even in water hazards on golf courses. At one time, untold millions of alligators lived here. But through the years, overhunting and human encroachment brought the reptiles to the brink of extinction. Then, in 1967, the American alligator was listed as an endangered species. It worked. Today, the population numbers more than 1 million. Florida may be great for alligators, but unfortunately, it's also great for something else: hurricanes. 4 of the 20th century's 5 most lethal hurricanes made landfall in Florida.
And even with all their fancy Doppler radar and all their hurricane hunter planes, they can't tell you where it's really headed until it's too late. When Mother Nature is homicidal, it's really scary.
If hurricanes weren't bad enough, Florida is second only to Louisiana in the amount of rainfall it receives. It also leads the nation in the number of people killed by lightning each year. The epicenter for the state's lightning activity is the Tampa Bay area, where warm airflow from the Gulf of Mexico often collides with cooler airflow from the Atlantic Ocean. In fact, the violent weather and uninviting land was precisely why Senator John Randolph of Virginia voted against acquiring Florida from Spain in 1805. He called the territory a land of swamps, of quagmires, of frogs, of alligators, and mosquitoes. Less than 100 years later, however, Florida became much more civilized, thanks to the efforts of one man, Henry Flagler. He and his business partner, John D. Rockefeller, were 2 of the co-founders of Standard Oil in 1870. 10 years later, Flagler was one of the wealthiest men in America.
Flagler had all the money in the world. He could have retired and played golf and collected dividends from Standard Oil for the rest of his life, but instead he came down to Florida and he couldn't leave it. So he got the idea to build himself a hotel of the sort he would like to stay in, which he did.
In 1888, Flagler opened the magnificent Ponce de Leon Hotel in St. Augustine.
And when he brought friends down, they loved it, but they also complained, as he did, how difficult it was to get to St. Augustine.
Flagler's solution was simple for him. He built himself a railroad. In 1905, Flagler set about to extend his rail line through the Florida Keys between Miami and Key West. He called it the Overseas Railway.
Nobody had ever built a railroad across 153 miles of what essentially was marshland or open water. And people thought this was insane.
Newspapers dubbed the railway Flagler's Folly. There was genuine concern, even among friends, that at the age of 75, Henry Flagler's brain had jumped the track. On January 22, 1912, after 7 years and $30 million, 82-year-old Henry Flagler climbed aboard his personal rail car in Homestead, Florida, and rode it all the way to Key West. Flagler died the following year. The railroad lasted until Labor Day 1935, when a monstrous hurricane smashed into the Florida Keys. Flagler's Folly was destroyed. But incredibly, many of his bridges survived and became the foundation for a new road called the Overseas Highway, completed in 1938.
Flagler's bridges were so solidly built that they realized it would be far more expensive to try to take them away than just to leave them there, and they stand to this day. It's sort of testament to this guy's vision.
In the 1950s, Florida, along with the rest of America, became captivated by a new challenge: space. In 1957, Russia became the first country to put a satellite into orbit. The U.S. response was to create NASA.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
To meet Kennedy's challenge to reach the moon in 10 years, NASA officials had to get serious about finding a suitable place to build a launch facility.
As they were coming from Cuba and the Caribbean along the coast of Florida, they would spot the Cape because it sticks out very prominently.
With 15,000 acres of remote, undeveloped land, the Cape wasn't just suitable, it was perfect.
First of all, you're launching over oceans, so if something should blow up, it's not going to fall on people's houses or on towns.
On May 5, 1961, Alan Shepard became the first American in space, an historic mission launched from the Cape. Every manned U.S. spaceflight since, from Gemini through Apollo to the Space Shuttle, has originated at Cape Canaveral. Whether conquering space, battling the elements, or homesteading uncharted territory, Floridians have long demonstrated a common trait with their state reptile: the ability to adapt.
Floridians are resilient and tough, and we've been through a lot, through storms and epidemics and riots, and when the chips are down, we take care of each other.
Look here, I'm talking about America, sweet America.